Episode 39, Circleville Letter Writer. Hey y'all, I'm Heather, and this is Poisoned Appalachia, the dark side of Appalachia. As always, thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed last week's episode on the Willow Island disaster. So sad to lose all those people in that area. I just think that's a sad episode, or sad story, really. But today's episode, I thought, was in Appalachia, but it actually isn't. But I'd already researched it, and it's super close to Appalachia, so I'm including it. Remember, I make the rules here. And honestly, Circleville, Ohio should be in Appalachia. If you've ever been there, you'll probably understand why. It just has an Appalachian feel to it. But today's not quite Appalachian episode is about the Circleville letter writer. If you haven't heard this episode, it's kind of a crazy one, I think. In summary, the Circleville letter writer was an anonymous individual who sent threatening letters to residents of Circleville, Ohio, beginning in March 1977. The letters often contained threats of violence and supposed blackmail aimed at coercing the recipients into complying with the writer's wishes, such as voting for a specific candidate. The identity of the letter writer remains unsolved, despite a 10-year prison sentence for a related booby-trapped incident. Before we look into the story, let's look at Circleville just for a quick second. Circleville is a city in Pickaway County, Ohio. The population is 13,927 at the 2020 census. It's a small farming town and a tight-knit community. It definitely has a very Appalachian feel about it. I think the only reason it isn't Appalachia is because it's like 20 miles from Columbus, so it's considered, I guess, probably within that metropolitan region. But it definitely, like I said, has a very Appalachian feel about it. Circleville is named after the original layout created in 1810, which was based upon the circular Hopewell tradition earthwork within which the city was built. The earthwork measured 1,100 feet in diameter and was constructed in the early centuries of the Common Era. The county courthouse was built in the center of the innermost circle. In the late 1830s, for various reasons, residents requested authorization from the state legislature to change the Circleville's layout to a standard grid format. This was accomplished by the mid-1850s, and all traces of the Hopewell earthwork were destroyed, although hundreds of other monuments of its kind still remain in the Ohio Valley. Circleville is a cute little town. I would definitely recommend checking out if you're in the area. Every October, they have a pumpkin show. Don't call it a pumpkin festival. It's called a pumpkin show. It's just, they have pumpkin everything there. Pumpkin flavored everything. And you can see giant pumpkins, pumpkin rides, just your typical small town festival. But it's a neat thing. I've been there before and I would recommend it definitely if you're in the area. But let's get back to the story. So this all started in this almost Appalachian town of Circleville in 1977. Mary Gillespie was a local school bus driver for the Circleville schools. She was married to Ron Gillespie, her high school sweetheart. They had 2 kids and were a happy family. I saw pictures of Mary, and she was a beautiful woman. She was like Miss Jackson, they said. I don't know if that was Jackson, Ohio or Jackson, Mississippi. But she was a very pretty lady. They had 2 kids, and they were a happy family. On March 17, 1977, Mary Gillespie received an anonymous letter in her mailbox. It had strange block lettering and was addressed to her. She opened it up and it read, "Stay away from Massey. Don't lie when questioned about meeting him. I know where you live. I've been observing your house and know you have children. This is no joke. Please take it serious. Everyone concerned has been notified and everything will be over soon." Soon her husband Ron Gillespie also started to receive letters urging him to put an end to Mary's supposed affair. Although Gillespie was married with children, the letter accused her of having an affair with Gordon Massey, the superintendent of the Circleville City Schools. The letter was threatening and accusatory, and it warned Gillespie that the writer would expose her affair if she didn't stop seeing Gillespie, or if she didn't stop seeing Massey. One letter to Mary read, "Lady, this is your last chance to report him. I know you are a pig and will prove it and shame you out of Ohio. A pig sneaks around and meets other women's husbands behind their backs, causes families and homes and marriages to suffer." The reason why Mary Gillespie was the target of the first Circleville letter is unknown. Some people believe that the writer was personally acquainted with Gillespie and had a grudge against her. Others believe that the writer was simply looking for someone to target, and Gillespie was a convenient target because she was a well-known member of the community. Regardless of the reason, the first Circleville letter set the tone for the rest of the letters. The letters were all threatening and accusatory, and they were designed to terrorize the recipients. The letters also showed that the writer was well informed about the personal lives of people they were targeting. The first Circleville letter is a disturbing reminder of the power that anonymous threats can have. The letter caused a great deal of anxiety and fear for Mary Gillespie and her entire family, and it also had a ripple effect on the entire Circleville community. In addition to the personal impact of Gillespie and her family, the first Circleville letter also had significant impact on the town of Circleville. This letter created a climate of fear and suspicion, and it made people afraid to trust each other. The letter also damaged the reputation of Circleville City Schools and made it difficult for the school district to attract and retain good teachers and administrators. Initially, Mary tried to keep her story as quiet as possible. The only person she informed was her husband, Ron. Mary also swore to Ron that the accusation was false and that she had no romantic connection to Gordon Massey. Not long after this, Ron received a letter from the mysterious scribe, which told Ron to admit the affair to the Westfall School Board. If Ron refused, the letter threatened to kill him. Again, Ron and Mary decided to keep things as quiet as possible. 2 weeks later, a much sterner letter arrived at the Gillespie household. Gillespie, you have had 2 weeks and done nothing. Make Mary admit the truth and inform the school board, the letter said. If Ron refused, the writer threatened to broadcast it on CBs, posters, signs, and billboards until the truth comes out. Mary and Ron continued to play the waiting game. For a time, the letter stopped, thus vindicating their decision. The couple did admit their troubles to Ron's sister and her husband, Paul Freshour. At first, Mary and Ron decided not to go to the police. They wanted to try to handle the matter privately, initially brushing it off as a prank or something with personal vendetta against them. But when the situation escalated, they knew that they couldn't stay quiet for much longer. Soon the letters appeared plastered around town. Then more aggressive threats started showing up. Next, Gordon Massey, superintendent of the schools, started receiving letters. Gordon was well thought of. He had a wife and a child. Nothing would seem out of the ordinary. A letter arrived at Westfall High School addressed to school superintendent Gordon Massey. The letter was handwritten in a distinctive block letter style and accused Massey of having an affair with a married school bus driver in Circleville. The writer told Massey to confess his affairs at the school board. The very next day, the writer sent a letter to the Westfall School Board telling about Massey's affair with one of the drivers. These letters, as well as all of the Circleville letters, were postmarked Columbus, Ohio, which is about 25 miles north of Circleville. The police investigated the letters but could not determine who was behind them. Meanwhile, Mary's husband, Ron, became convinced that the superintendent, Gordon Massey, was the one sending the letters. Ron began to investigate the matter himself and even went so far as to confront Massey. However, the superintendent denied any involvement and claimed that he had also received threatening letters. At this point, both Mary and Ron had received letters threatening them and their children if Mary didn't admit to the affair with Gordon Massey. In addition to the letters, there were also phone calls to the Gillespie home and offensive signs posted along Mary's bus route. Many of these signs made offensive, explicit references to the Gillespie's young daughter. It was even implied that Gordon Massey was having sex with the Gillespie's daughter. Signs started going up on Mary's bus route, and Ron would get up early in the morning, every morning, and take them down before anyone could see them. From the beginning, Mary suspected the letters were sent by David Longberry, a fellow bus driver who had expressed romantic interest in her and whom she had rejected. David Longberry, the school bus driver Mary Gillespie originally suspected of writing the letters back in 1977, actually raped an 11-year-old in 1999. He went on the run and is still currently a fugitive, so I don't know. Maybe it was him. But let's go into all the other people here. Determined to get to the bottom of who was writing the letters, Mary and Ron reached out to Ron's sister, Karen Freshour, and her husband, Paul. Paul's sister was also told about the letters, but at this time, no one else knew about them. Since Mary believed David Longberry was the writer, the five of them, the Gillespies, the Freshours, and Paul's sister, decided to write their own letter to David, telling them that they knew he was the writer. The letter stopped for a few weeks, so they thought they had identified the writer and put a stop to the letters. But a few weeks later, the letters resumed, and then a tragedy occurred. In August 1977, Mary took a trip to Florida with her sister-in-law. Before she left, Ron told her that he thought he knew who the letter writer was, but he didn't tell her who it was. On August 19, 1977, Ron received a call at home that enraged him. He told his daughter that the call was from the letter writer and got his gun. Moments later, Gillespie stormed out of his truck with a .22 caliber revolver in hand. He told his daughter that he was going to confront the Circleville letter writer. After he left, Gillespie's truck slid off the road and rammed into a tree. Gillespie died at the scene. Ron Gillespie's truck was found at 10:35 that night, crashed into the tree with Ron's body inside. He had died of major internal injuries. Ron had never been a drinker, but his body had twice the legal limit of alcohol in his bloodstream, which seemed very suspicious. Before he died, did Ron Gillespie confront the Circleville letter writer? Police determined that Gillespie's gun had been fired exactly once before his death. They never learned why Ron fired his weapon. Many Circleville residents believe that Ron's death was not an accident, it was murder. After all, the letter writer had threatened Ron's life if he didn't expose his wife's affair. In particular, Ron's brother-in-law, Paul Freshour, believed that Ron had been murdered after uncovering the identity of the letter writer. There were essentially two pieces of evidence that supported the murder theory. One, Ron was not a heavy drinker, but his blood alcohol level was 1.5 times the acceptable limit. And two, Ron's gun was found under his body, and it appeared that one round had been fired somewhere between when he left the house and his body was found. The sheriff at the time, Dwight Radcliffe, originally suspected foul play was involved in Ron's death, and there was even a person of interest in the case who was interviewed and given a polygraph test, which they passed. The person of interest has never been publicly identified, though. But after the coroner Dr. Ray Carroll, examined the body and found the high blood alcohol level, the sheriff changed his mind and believed Ron's death was an accident caused by drunk driving. But apparently Sheriff Radcliffe had motivation to cover up a possible murder, as he was running for president of the National Sheriff's Association. In a town plagued by not only an unhinged letter writer, but one who had turned to be a murderer, wouldn't be a good look for the president of this organization. This letter writer was also frustrated by the lack of investigation into the case and wrote letters claiming that Sheriff Radcliffe was covering up the truth of Ron's death. After Ron's death... Pause. I'm going to put this in here in this spot instead of earlier. Dr. Ray Carroll, the county coroner who claimed that Ron Gillespie died with a BAC of 1.5 times the legal limit and who was accused by the Circleville letter writer of child molestation, was charged with 12 counts of gross immorality, sex crimes, corruption of a minor, pornography, obscenity, and indecent exposure in December of 1993. So, that one the letter writer was spot on about. So who knows? Who knows how many of these he is? But after Ron's death, the harassment continued, with letters being sent not just to Mary, but to citizens around town, to the newspaper, to local businesses, to schools, basically to everyone in Circleville. Other residents were scared since the letter writers seemed completely unhinged and knew details of their lives that a stranger would have no way of knowing. Meanwhile, Paul Freshour continued to insist that Ron had been murdered, even filed a report requesting the FBI investigate Ron's death. Even after Ron Gillespie's death, the Circleville letters continued to arrive, and they continued to target Mary Gillespie, now a widow, and Gordon Massey. Everyone knows what you have done, the letters taunted. If you don't believe us, just make them mad and find out for yourself. And though Mary had always denied having an affair with Gordon Massey while her husband was alive, after his death she and Massey began a romantic relationship. Well, that's very convenient, isn't it? At this point, threats against her became more vicious, including explicit threats against Mary's daughter. Businesses and institutions in town were not immune either. The letters accused local officials of corruption and misconduct, creating chaos in the public sphere. Some letters targeted school officials and law enforcement, raising tensions and further eroding trust within the community. Even those who had never received a letter directly felt the pressure, knowing that they could be next. The psychological toll of the Circleville letters cannot be overstated. Many residents described feeling like they were being watched at all times, their privacy stripped away, the constant fear of exposure and a threat of violence turned daily life into a source of anxiety. The small, quiet town had transformed into a battleground where an invisible adversary controlled the narrative, exploiting the vulnerabilities of its people. The attacks grew even more devious. Years after Ron's death in 1983, Mary Gillespie nearly fell into a fatal trap. One February day, Gillespie stopped her bus on their way to school. Someone had just put a handmade sign on a nearby fence targeting her teenage daughter. Her daughter even started receiving letters and threats. So on February 7th, 1983, Mary was driving her school bus near Five Points Pike when she saw a sign posted along a nearby fence. The sign was handwritten and included an obscene message about Mary's 12-year-old daughter. Mary pulled over and attempted to remove the sign, but when she pulled on it, she saw that it was attached to a box with some twine. Mary decided to take the box home, and when she opened it, she found a gun inside. Mary brought the box to the sheriff's office, who determined the box was a booby trap that had been designed to fire the gun, where the gun was pulled down. For some reason, the booby trap did not trigger when Mary removed the sign. Thank goodness. The gun gave authorities a break in the case. The Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation was able to recover a serial number from the weapon. They tracked it down to a guy that had owned it and said he sold it to his coworker. That co-worker he sold it to was Paul Freshour, the man married to Ron Gillespie's sister. Well, that's a twist. This is where things get a bit murky, though. Paul and his wife were going through a bad divorce. Paul Freshour's wife, Karen Sue, confessed to police that her husband had written the Circleville letters. The couple had been in the middle of a contentious divorce, and Karen Sue had evidence she discovered letters hidden throughout their house. But she never showed these letters to anybody, so it was just kind of her word against his there. Freshour denied writing the letters. He claimed the gun had been stolen weeks earlier, yet a polygraph test declared Freshour a liar. But polygraph tests are often not very accurate, so I don't know. Not sure about Paul. Police arrested Freshour, and in 1984, a jury convicted him of attempted murder. During the trial, an expert witness testified that Freshour had written the Circleville letters. Paul Freshour was never tried for the letters, though, just the attempted murder. There is no physical evidence other than that Paul had owned the gun that actually pointed at Paul, but the jury still found him guilty of attempted murder. He received a maximum sentence 7 to 25 years in prison. The letter writer also made accusations against Roger Klein, the prosecutor who helped to convict Paul Freshour, but those are a little bit harder to confirm. Specifically, he was accused of having an affair with the school teacher and then having her murdered when he found out she was pregnant. But despite some random couple in Ohio confirming the story to a news TV station, there's literally no evidence of this. Klein became an appellate court judge before retiring in 2013. Circleville residents hoped that with Freshour behind bars, the letters would stop, but they didn't. Hundreds of letters swamped Circleville after Freshour's conviction. The prison warden declared that Freshour could not possibly have sent him. The prisoner had no access to pens and paper. For many in Circleville, Freshour's conviction brought a sense of relief. The man believed to be the mastermind behind years of fear and mistrust was finally behind bars. However, the relief was short-lived. Even as Freshour served his sentence, the letters didn't stop. In fact, they continued to arrive, taunting residents and raising doubts about whether the right person had been convicted. One of the most perplexing aspects of the case was that Freshour himself received letters while in prison. The anonymous writer mocked him and claimed responsibility for the continued harassment of Circleville residents. Freshour's alibi seemed unshakable, and he was incarcerated with no access to mail, yet the letters persisted, leaving law enforcement and the community wondering whether Freshour was a scapegoat or part of the larger conspiracy. Who hated Paul enough to try to get him into trouble? Freshour's lawyer asked the jury during his trial. If you read the divorce decree, who stands to profit financially if Paul is convicted and goes to prison? When the Circleville letters continued, suspicion centered on ex-wife Karen Sue. She had reported her husband to the police. Did Karen Sue and her boyfriend, who matched a witness description from the booby trap crime, set up Paul Freshour? Karen Sue had lost custody of her daughters and was living in a trailer on Mary Gillespie's property at the time. She was the first to link Paul to the crimes, and in fact, on one show I watched, it said that there was a witness of someone planning the booby trap that said they were driving an orange El Camino. Karen's brother had an El Camino and the same body type and collar, and the person that was setting it was similar to her boyfriend's looks. So who knows? It just seems a bit suspicious, but if Paul didn't do it, and if Karen Sue did, then did she do it all? The letters and the booby trap, or did she just set the trap hoping to frame Paul? Karen Sue was never a suspect, though. Most of that's just conjecture or hearsay. So, who sent the letters? A decade passed, and the Circleville letter mystery only grew. In December 1993, when Unsolved Mysteries came to Circleville to investigate, the show also received an anonymous letter. Forget Circleville, Ohio. If you come to Ohio, you L sickos will pay. It was signed the Circleville letter writer. They still came and did their show, and nothing happened, so... In 1994, the letters abruptly stopped when Paul was released from prison. Paul Freshour was released on parole in 1994 after spending 10 years in prison. He maintained his innocence until his death in 2012 at the age of 70. After his release, he maintained a website dedicated to professing his innocence. In August 2021, the CBS show 48 Hours aired an episode that they claimed definitively identified the Circleville letter writer through forensic documentation evidence. CBS hired a document examiner, Beverly East, to compare the Circleville letters to Paul Freshour's known handwriting. She found numerous links between the letter writer's handwriting and Paul's, especially in the formation of his numbers. East said that there were patterns in anonymous letters that did not match Paul's handwriting, but found more than 100 quirks of Paul's writing that did match. However, not all experts agree that Paul Freshour is responsible for writing the letters. Former FBI profiler Mary Ellen O'Toole does not believe there's enough evidence to state that Paul was the letter writer. In particular, O'Toole points out that the letters were sent while Paul was in prison. Since it was physically impossible for Paul to write these and send these, it seems clear that there had to be another person involved. It should be noted that there were not just a couple of letters sent during the 10 years of Paul's incarceration. There were literally hundreds of letters sent to people all over central Ohio. O'Toole also believes the letters were written by a female writer and that the letter writer was not well educated. Paul Freshour had 3 college degrees, including a master's degree. So despite the claims of 48 hours, it is clear that they did not, in fact, definitively identify the letter writer. The question of who wrote the letters, who set the booby trap for Mary Gillespie, and whatever Ron Gillespie died of as a result of an accident, and whether Ron Gillespie died as a result of an accident or foul play, has yet to be answered even after 45 years. When Paul Freshour was convicted of setting the booby trap intended to kill Mary Gillespie in part based on the anonymous letters, neither he nor anyone else had ever been charged with writing the Circleville letters. Additionally, Paul Freshour's conviction was based solely on circumstantial evidence, which I mentioned earlier. And while Paul's conviction relied on the idea that he was the letter writer and that the letter writer and the person who set the booby traps were one and the same, it is impossible that he is responsible for the hundreds of letters that were sent while he was in prison. One theory of those letters is that there were multiple letter writers, not just one. This would explain how the letter writer knew secrets about such a large group of people, literally hundreds of people in central Ohio, received these letters, as well as how the letters continued after Paul Freshour was put in prison. While it's unlikely that there would be numerous letter writers who all managed to keep this huge secret over 40 years, it's not possible to rule this out. Another odd element of this case is the glaring absence of Gordon Massey from all of the reporting of the events. The most vitriolic letters were sent to or about Massey. The sign that was booby-trapped included a message that Mary's 12-year-old daughter was involved in a sexual relationship with Massey. Massey was also the target of early letters, and despite Mary Gillespie's denial of an affair with Massey, the two did have a romantic relationship after Ron's death. About Massey available, despite the huge amounts of information from many of the other people involved in the case. Massey was a well-respected member of the Circleville community and was married with a son. He died in 1996. One article I read stated that in 2006, the case took yet another turn when a former police officer named James Renner began investigating the case. Renner had grown up in Circleville and had always been fascinated by the mystery. He began to uncover new evidence and interviewed several individuals who claimed to have knowledge of the case. Renner's investigation led him to a new suspect, a former school superintendent named Dwight L. Bowman. According to Renner, Bowman had a motive for sending the letters, as he had been fired from his position as superintendent and his grudge against several of the individuals who received the letters. However, Bowman died in 2009 and authorities were unable to question him about it. I read a Medium article that had a few explanations too, so I wanted to include those here. Theories surrounding the Circleville letters. The unsolved mystery of the Circleville letter has spawned numerous theories over the decades. The persistence, specificity, and venom of the letters make this case unlike any other, leaving investigators and enthusiasts to speculate about the true identity of the writer and the motivations. While no single theory has been definitively proven, several possibilities offer compelling explanations. First, Paul Freshour was the writer. The simplest theory suggests that Paul, the man convicted in connection with the case, was the sole writer. Prosecutors pointed to his connection to Mary Gillespie and the booby trap incident as evidence of his guilt. Handwriting experts testified that Freshour's writing closely matched the style of the letters, and the gun used in the trap was traced back to him. However, skeptics argue that this theory has significant flaws. The letters continued while Freshour was in prison, suggesting that either he was wrongly convicted, or that he had an accomplice. Freshour himself maintained his innocence until his death, claiming he had been framed. Next, a family vendetta. Another popular theory points to a family vendetta as a motive behind the letters. Mary Gillespie, one of the primary targets, was accused of having an affair, and her husband Ron became another victim of the writer's wrath. Some speculate that the writer was a member of the Gillespie family or someone close to him, seeking to expose secrets and settle scores. This theory gained traction because of the writer's intimate knowledge of the Gillespies' lives. However, it fails to explain why so many other residents of Circleville were targeted or why the campaign continued so many years. Multiple writers is another thing that it could be. The idea that the Circleville letters were the work of more than one person has intrigued many. Some theorists believe that a group of individuals coordinated the effort, possibly to manipulate or intimidate the community. This could explain the wide range of targets and the continuation of the letters during Fresh Hour's incarceration. Supporters of this theory point to the consistent style of the letters, arguing that it would have been relatively easy for multiple writers to replicate the same handwriting. However, the level and detail of the letters makes the theory difficult to prove, as it would require significant collaboration of information sharing among the writers. A hoax or prank gone too far. Could the Circleville letter writers have started out as a prank that spiraled out of control? Some suggest that the initial letters were meant as a joke or a personal vendetta, but grew into something much larger as the writer realized the power of their anonymity. This theory explains the escalating nature of the campaign, but it struggles to account for the violent turn, including the booby trap aimed at Mary Gillespie. The level of effort and risk involved in such actions suggests that the writer's motives went beyond more than just mischief. An outsider with no connection to Circleville. One of the more outlandish theories is that the letter writer was an outsider with no direct ties to the community. This individual may have been motivated by a desire to sow chaos and fear, choosing Circleville as their target simply because it was a small insular town where the impact would be most profound. While intriguing, this theory is difficult to support. The writer's detailed knowledge of Circleville's residents strongly suggests a connection to the town, making the idea of an outsider less plausible. After all this time, no one still knows, really, and they probably never will unless that person comes forward. So, strange how letters can cause so much turmoil in people's lives. I searched and really don't know what happened to Mary Gillespie. I don't know if she's still alive, still in the area, or what happened to her. I hope that she had some sort of peace after everything, but I really doubt it. So that's it. That's about it for today's episode. As always, thank you for listening. You can follow me on social media under Poison Appalachia. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, Threads, Lemonade, TikTok, Blue Sky, and YouTube. If you could, on the podcast platform you listen to, like and rate me and share me, please. Let everyone know about my podcast. Let's get the word out. Thanks, y'all, and have a great week.